my little butterflies, welcome back to my channel, Butterfly MUA. Today is some like makeup science, but not very scientific, just a bit of fun. So I have some eyeshadow palettes and highlighter palettes that I have currently put in my declutter series, and I thought, you know what, I don't want them going to waste, so I am going to smush them all up, mix them all together and create my own palette. So the first few you have just seen me smash up is the MAC Wonder Ignite palette, the Elizabeth Arden Glittery palette, a Model Co highlighter, and was there another one? Oh yeah, the Manny Mua and Morphe palette. I had now smushing all those highlighter shades together, and I am using some Surgical Spirit, which is like the British equivalent of rubbing alcohol. So yeah, I have just smushed them all together. I'm now putting them back in the pan and repressing them. What I've decided I'm going to do is recreate the Morphe Manny Mua palette, but using different eyeshadow palettes. So what I'm going to do is take an eyeshadow palette, smush it all up, mix all the shades together to see what the shade is created by that one palette. And then I'm going to name them all and we're going to have fun. So that is the highlighter shade done. So all the excess I'm going to keep and mix together at the end. So I'm now going to attack the Morphe and Manny Mua eyeshadow part of the palette. So I actually find this really fun and sort of therapeutic to do. I've always been fascinated by making my own makeup, so sort of destroying it is kind of fun, and then repressing it as well is just as fun but even more messy. So yeah, like, I hope you enjoy this video. It's very different and it is a long one, so if you do want to go grab a cup of tea, pause the video here and go and get one. But yeah, you're going to see my little routine and how I repress makeup. So all I do is I choose a pan, grab a spoonful of the eyeshadow, take a small syringe and sort of use a sort of biggish amount, like it turns into a paste, to repress the eyeshadow, and I sort of smush that all around again to make sure it's all damp. And then I have got like a nail varnish, covered the lid in cling film, and then I push it down to press it. So I'm trying to keep it clean, but you will see by the end of this video that the palette does not stay clean. So the next palette on my list is the Smashbox, I think it's like repost palette. It's meant to be like a thing for like Instagrammers, like hashtag repost kind of thing. And I actually really like the packaging. It looks like a camera lens, but the palette for me just did not work. It only had 3 shades. It was very hard to work with. So I thought, why not smush this one up and make a purple shade for my palette. So the next one is the Espresso Yourself eyeshadow palette by The Beauty Crop. So this one is actually a nice looking palette and it did work. It was a subtly pretty palette, but I found a lot of the shades redundant. They sort of worked the same. The eye looks you would create with the same. It could have got away with being a 9 pan instead of a gazillion pan. It's also meant to have coffee extract in. I didn't really notice it do anything to my eyes, like depuff them or anything, so I think that's pretty pointless. But I kind of like the idea behind the whole coffee extract and then coffee themed palette. So I do have to say, like, watching this back, but actually when I was making it, a lot of the shades, like, it doesn't matter what palette I destroy, a lot of the shades do turn out quite neutral, quite nude in tone, you know, sort of very brown in shade. So this is definitely going to be a new neutral toned palette, but hopefully with all the palettes I don't like all smushed up, it makes a good neutral palette. So then this is the Maybelline Mini City palette. Now the formula of this one was very chalky, but it wasn't actually that bad. And this ends up being like the only matte shade out of the whole new palette that I create, which is kind of funny. And the next one is the Revolution and Roxi palette. So this one is slightly different because it is more rainbow compared to the other palettes that I have used. So this one, I actually really like Roxi and I love Revolution, but this palette for me just did not work how I wanted it to. So it gets the smush treatment, and blending it all up, once again it turns out to be quite a brown eyeshadow shade, but it's quite a warmish toned eyeshadow shade, I think because of all the other colours that are in there, like you had oranges, reds, yellows, as well as blues. But it's quite funny to see the different tones throughout the palette when this is pressed. And yeah, another quick clean up, but you can see it's getting messier by the minute. So then it's the I Heart Revolution Gingerbread palette. It was one of my favourite ones at Christmas time, but I ended up getting quite bored of it. The colour story wasn't for me. So yeah, I decided to destroy this one as well. So again, this is another one that's going to be quite sort of not multicoloured, because when it comes out it doesn't look multicoloured, it's still like a brownie shade, but it has different tones in there that make it a different brownie tone shade. So it's quite interesting seeing how all these palettes do come out like a brownie tone, but there's like a difference between them all. It's quite funny and not very scientific. Next up we have the Estee Lauder Glam palette. I love the packaging of this. Now this one does have a blush in it, and I am going to smash up some blushes and put them all together. But I didn't plan on doing that while I did this one, so I mixed it all in with the eyeshadows, which is fine because I actually thought it might make like a matte purple kind of shade. It does not. It kind of creates like a dusty blue, which actually I'm not mad about. Like it's actually quite nice, and you can create some really nice smoky looks with this, because as you will see at the end of this video, I do test it out and I do put these shadows through their paces to see how they work. Next up I have a mini Revolution palette, which I got in a calendar, I have to say, like not the Christmas we just had, the Christmas before. And while the shades are actually really nice, I have them in other palettes, so it just seems sort of redundant to keep this one around. And when this one is repressed and dries down, it is a stunning shade. So, I mean, I'm not biased or anything. I love the Revolution formula, so I kind of knew this one was going to be a bit of a hit in my eyeshadow palette. But to be honest, all of them work quite well. So next up I have the Elizabeth Arden palette. I don't know the name of it, but it's just very glittery. So this one has a mixture of highlighters, blushes, eyeshadows, lipsticks. The lipsticks I don't like in a palette like this because they tend to get all the other like product ingredients on them and it sort of taints them. The eyeshadows did not work how I wanted to. The blush and the highlight was actually quite nice. But yeah, the palette as a whole was just not for me. And again, quite colourful shades in there, but it turns out to be quite a brownie nude shade. Next up I have the Makeup Obsession Mood palette. So I got this one and the Angel Energy palette. I have to say the Angel Energy palette was my favourite out of the two. It had more colourful tones in, which if you know me, I much prefer colourful tones than neutrals. But you know, Smushing it up and mixing it. Okay, so next up I have the Perfect 10 palette by Soap and Glory. This one has a mixture of mattes and slight shimmers, like they're not overly shimmery. So this ends up looking like a bit of a shimmery colour in my new palette, but it's kind of mattified as well. It's like a hybrid, I guess, but it works quite well. It looks quite pretty. So I'm nearly done, only 2 pans left to do, and this video has actually gone quite quick, like thus far, but filming this, it took me a good few hours, which is so funny. So I'm now going to do the blushes. So I have the blushes from the Elizabeth Arden, and the one you just saw was a Marks and Spencer's one. So again, mushing them together, I'm going to repress them, and I have to say this was the hardest one in the palette to press. Like, for some reason I couldn't get it to stick down properly, it kept breaking, it kept crumbling. So I don't know whether the blushes were a slightly different formula to the rest of whatever's in this palette. But yeah, I found it really hard. Like, as you can see, it kept crumbling, kept breaking. In the end, I just had to try and use my finger to try and push it down to keep it in. So now I am mixing everything together. So from every single palette, every single formula is all being mixed together to create a final shade, which it actually looks like cocoa powder. Like, it looks like it should be in a hot chocolate. It looks really funny. So this is what my finished eyeshadow palette looks like. Obviously I have to leave it overnight to let it dry. Then in the morning I'm gonna pull it out and test it. But it's really funny to see all the different tones and like weird mixtures of pigment in them. So yeah, wait and see how this one works. Hi, so it is day 2 of my little experiment with my eyeshadow palettes. So you would have seen me destroy 11 eyeshadow palettes and put them all into another palette. So I have decided to decorate said palette. I decided to decorate it so if I was to use it on camera after this video, I could refer back to this as my like experimental palette, but also so you wouldn't look at it and think, well, what's she going on about? That's such and such palette. Because it is no longer the Morphe and Manny Mua palette, it is the Brutal palette. I decided to smash the words together, Brushfly and neutral, so we ended up with a Brutal. So I just cut out some letters from a magazine. I put a little picture of a coffee cup down here. That is just to show that it is a neutral coloured eyeshadow palette and it doesn't have the colours that are on the sticky back plastic thing. That was just something that I had left over from when I decorated an OFD, I think that's what it's called, that I had from work, and it is now my makeup book storage. So today, or on day 2, I am going to be testing out this palette and seeing how all these things work together, whether the eyeshadows work better than they did before, whether the blush does, whether the highlight does. So I think it's going to be quite interesting to see. So you would have seen when I destroyed all the palettes and mashed them up into this palette that most of the shades came out quite brown, quite neutral, which is quite funny because obviously the reason I was decluttering the palettes that I used in this experiment was because they were neutral and I'm not a very neutral kind of person. But the fact that I now have technically 11 palettes mashed up into one palette is quite good. You know, it means I've gotten rid of 11 palettes out of my collection and hopefully they will work a bit better. So you would have seen the palettes that I used And what I have decided to do is write the names of the palettes that correspond to the certain shade. So like this one is from the original Manny Mua and Morphe palette. This one here was from the Smashbox palette, and you know, so on. So I thought it'd be quite good to name them after their palettes or company palettes, so you know, we know what shade is what. So I think I'm just going to dive straight in, swatch them, see how they swatch, and then decide on a look that I'm going to do with this palette. And my chair is really creaky today. Okay, so here are some of the shades. The other shades are on the back of my arm. So this one is all of them mixed together. Then we have Soap for Soap and Glory. Then we have Mood for the Makeup Obsession Mood palette. Then we have Elizabeth Arden for the Elizabeth Arden palette. Then we have Revolution for the little palette from Revolution. We have the Estee Lauder one, which had the blues in. Then we have Gingerbread, which was an I Heart Revolution palette. Then we have Roxi, which was the Revolution and Roxi collaboration palette. This one is Maybelline. Then we have the Espresso Beauty Crop palette. We have the Smashbox palette. Then we have the Manny Mua. I hope you can see them, I haven't really swatched very well. Then we have the blush that I created and the highlight. Said they have come out very neutral, very brown in tone, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously the reason I decided to do this experiment was because the palettes that I was destroying were all neutrals, and well, actually no, in saying that, most of them were neutral tones. The Roxi one and the Gingerbread one had a lot more colours in, and even the Elizabeth Arden, but mushed all together, it just comes out as brown, but different toned brown. So yeah, I think I'm just going to dive in and start playing with what's in this palette. So I'm going to go with the blush first. So obviously you can see I decorated it, but I still kept the little mirror in so I can use it. Now the blush does look quite peachy toned, and I have got a little bit of blush on underneath because I did the school run. Don't look too clowny. So now I'm going to go in with the highlighter. So that is very highlightery. I hope it shows up in the camera. Okay, so I feel the highlighter actually gives quite a nice glow. It's actually not a bad shade all mixed together. I think I actually prefer them all mixed together. To be honest, most of the highlighters that I smushed together were not actually bad highlighters. It was just they were in palettes with other stuff that I didn't like. Other than the MAC ones were not my favourite, but definitely all together I think it has worked really, really well. The blush has also worked really well. That was the Marks and Spencer's one and the Elizabeth Arden blushes crushed together. I think it's actually got quite a nice tone about it. So yeah, at the moment I'm kind of happy. So I now want to move on to the eyeshadows. So I'm just going to quickly prime my eyes. So that is my eyes primed. Before I start, I'm going to have a swig of a cup of tea. Do you know what? I might go in with this Revolution one, which was the Tiny Revolution palette. I'm gonna take a brush and see how it applies to the eye. It's really funny because I can still smell the, oh, what's it called? It's like rubbing alcohol, but the UK version. Yeah, I can't remember what it's called, but I can still smell the alcohol. Okay, so that actually has quite a lot of pigment in. Now, when I decided to declutter that palette, there was actually nothing wrong with it. I just had those shades in other palettes. So I was like, well, I'm not going to use it. But altogether, it is actually really nice. It's got a hell of a lot of shimmer in. And I don't know why, but I was looking at it expecting it to be a bit more matte, but it's not. It's got a lot of shimmer. And to be honest, I think the only real shade in this palette, the Maybelline one, I think that is the only real matte shade. I think the rest are all shimmery shades. Okay, so that one is kind of cool. I do kind of like that. I might go in with a tiny bit of matte Maybelline just to see how it works. Okay, that shade kind of works. I don't know whether you'll be able to see it at the end of this look because I want to put some other stuff over it. Okay. I'm going to go in with gingerbread. Let's go up here. Okay, you probably can't really tell much of a difference from the shimmery one, but it does look kind of cool. Okay, so I want to go in with a bit of the Smashbox purple shade. It's so funny with this one, you can see like the white shade peeking through. Okay, there is a little bit of fallout, but I'm not too fussed about. Okay, so I now want to go in with the Estee Lauder, the slightly bluier tone. And just and I might just go back in with the Revolution one. And then might go in with espresso, but use my finger. Might take some of the Manny Mua. maybe a bit of, oh, I don't know. Maybe a little bit of soap for Soap and Glory. Okay, I'm just gonna tidy up and sort out my mascara and see what I think. Okay, so here is the finished look. I'm actually really happy with how it's turned out. It actually looks really, really pretty, and it's definitely more of a colour story now that I would personally play with. I would wear it a bit more. I really like the purple shade, like in the palette, the way it was in the Smashbox one. It did not call to me, it did not look that purple. Like, it had purple, but it wasn't one that I would use. It had a really pale one and a really dark one, and using them together would just muddy the look. Whereas actually together, I think they work really, really well. I quite like the bluey shade on the outer corner, the more goldeny shade on the inner section, and that Revolution colour, the first one I put down, I really, really like that. I have used pretty much most of these shades. I think the only two I didn't use was Elizabeth Arden and All, which was all of the shades smushed together. I think overall I'm really pleased with how this experiment has come out. I mean, you know, makeup is so fun, it's so versatile. Like, you can experiment in whatever way you want with makeup, whether that's how you wear it or how you destroy it and put it back together. Makeup is just so fun, and there is no right or wrong way, honestly. Like, you do you, you wear makeup how you want to, and if you have a group of palettes that do not work for you, smash them up, smush them all together and see what shades you come up with. Like, I think this is such a good palette now. It's definitely more of a Mercy wearable palette, or a Brushfly wearable palette. It's definitely more me. Yes, obviously where I have repressed them, it's not going to be even throughout the whole like shade. Like in the purple shade, you can see the white bits of pigment poking through, which means sometimes when you use it, I'm going to get more of a pale purple than a purple purple. But that's okay, that's the whole fun of this. And also, like in some of the other shades, you can see like the reddy greeny tones poking through from the other shades that were in the palette. So one time you might get a more warm toned eye look from that shade, or another time I might get a more cool toned look, but that's the whole fun of it. So yeah, I'm definitely really happy with how my little experiment has turned out. I would much rather keep this one palette than keep the whole 11 that I would just not use, and they would just sit there and go to waste. At least this way they have been reincarnated into something else. Obviously, I'm now going to go off and do things during the day, see how it wears, but I've got a feeling this is going to wear okay. So yeah, I am really happy. My lipstick today is the Revolution Homer, or Donut Head Homer lipstick. So yeah, I'm really happy with how this experiment has turned out. It's really fun to do. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up and comment down below. Would you like me to do some more makeup experiment stuffs? I do have some planned for some lipsticks very soon. I'm just waiting for a thing to turn up so I can actually put the lipsticks in to cool down and maintain a lipsticky shape. But yeah, I had fun, hope you had fun, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!